Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. Martin Luther King describes this town as the most segregated city in the world. Racism was everywhere. Laws were in place to not allow blacks to get jobs, be tried fairly in court, or even drink at the same water fountain. With segregation at its peak, Dr. King decided to go forth with a plan now known as Project C. Project C is a plan that involves hundreds of peaceful protests and protesters around the city to force the local government to give in to their demands of equality. While simply following their First Amendment right to assemble in peace, they were met by Police Commissioner Bull Connor. James Stewart and Arnita Streeter Gary were among those who marched for civil rights in Birmingham in 1963. Stewart was just 15 years old and one of 1,000 children who were determined to protest the city's segregation laws, a social code in Birmingham that would not give up easily. Stewart recalls the protests. She says, "We said enough is enough is enough. We're not living with this. And when they brought the dogs and water hoses out, that was a greater weapon that they were deploying. So for me, it was wartime." Streeter Gary was there too, aged 16. She recalls the high-pressure water jets held by Birmingham firemen and used against those marching. Streeter Gary says, "I don't think I will ever forget that water, and when you would run, they had the dogs waiting. I thank the Lord they didn't put the dogs on me." The protest became known as the Birmingham Children's March. Adults had been warned not to protest or they would lose their jobs. Instead, their children, 12 to 18 years old, organized and filled the streets. After all the violence, President John F. Kennedy had to get involved. President Kennedy ordered all the laws from segregation to be uplifted. Celebrations ensued. A massive celebratory march took the streets soon after. Peace was reached, but not for long. Not everyone was happy about the laws being uplifted. Members of the Ku Klux Klan were furious over the equality African Americans had gained. It was the Klan's turn to strike.
On September 15, 1963, the congregation of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama greeted each other day before the start of Sunday service. In the basement of the church, 5 young girls, 2 of them sisters, gathered in the ladies' room in their best dresses, happily chatting about the first days of the new school year. It was the youth day, and excitement filled the air. They were going to take part in the Sunday adult service. Just before 11 o'clock, instead of rising to begin prayers, the congregation was knocked to the ground. As a bomb exploded under the steps of the church, they sought safely under the pews and shielded each other from falling debris. In the basement, 14-year-olds Addie Mae Collins, Dennis McNair, Carol Robertson, and 11-year-old Cynthia Wesley were killed. Addie's sister Susan arrived, but was permanently blinded. No official attacks occurred after this event, but many other unknown attacks happened in secret.
But the question still remains, does equality exist today?
In Birmingham, Alabama, people stood up for their rights to make a change within their society. Little did they know, they were impacting the lives of many people today. Legally, those rights they were fighting for in 1963 were won, but socially people are still fighting racism and other issues dealing with discrimination.
For example, there is still police brutality directed towards African Americans. A teen being shot in the city of Chicago is an example of this. One of the 8 officers on the scene unloaded his gun on him, which is a total of 16 shots. Since this was the result of the teen turning away from the officer, his actions were not justifiable in court.
So how does this recent incident in Chicago relate to the cases of police brutality in Birmingham, Alabama? On September 15, 1963, a bomb exploded at the 16th Street Baptist Church. The blast killed 4 little girls and became a tragic marker in civil rights history. In the midst of all the chaos, racial violence broke out on the streets, leading to another, less well-known killing that day. For decades, the circumstances surrounding 16-year-old Johnny Robinson's death remained a mystery.
Witnesses reported to FBI agents that Johnny was with a group of boys who threw rocks at a car draped with a Confederate flag. The rocks missed their target and hit another vehicle instead. That's when a police car arrived. The boys all ran away and Johnny was shot with his back turned to the cops. Similarly, there were other police officers on the scene who did not shoot.
Back then, the officer wasn't found guilty in court, whereas today the officer with the Chicago case was. That's why we believe that equality exists today by law, but not socially. Racism still exists in cities, towns, and on the streets. People still discriminate based on religion, gender, and race, even though it's not acceptable by law.
Here's what is happening today to help with the issues debated back in the 1960s. As an organization whose mission grew out of the 1960s civil rights movement, the ERC is committed to eliminating race-based discrimination. Although significant gains have been made, including the recent inauguration of the first African American president of the United States, racial discrimination still occurs in housing, employment, access to public accommodations, and other areas of daily life. The ERC advances civil rights laws to ensure all individuals are treated with equality regardless of their race. Also, issues back then changed employment standards today. An employment policy or practice that applies to everyone, regardless of race or color, can be illegal if it has a negative impact on the employment of people of a particular race or color, and it is not job-related and necessary to the operation of the business. For example, a no-beard employment policy that applies to all workers without regard to race may still be unlawful if it is not job-related and has a negative impact on the employment of African American men.